Yes, I intend to complete my legal education and become a lawyer and be a damn good lawyer. And I have a great model over here, so I think things are going to work out. That's
What do you do when the monster doesn't look like a monster? When he's charming, intelligent, studying law, and working at a suicide crisis hotline, helping people who are contemplating the very act he himself will commit. When his girlfriend of 6 years describes him as the perfect man, and even the FBI agents hunting him admit they found him likable. This is the psychological paradox of Ted Bundy. To understand him, we have to go beyond the headlines and into the mind itself. In the summer of 1974, women were disappearing from the Pacific Northwest. The press called it a nightmare, but here's what made it terrifying in a way no one understood yet. The man responsible didn't look dangerous. He looked like someone you'd trust. Today, we're building a psychological profile of Theodore Robert Bundy. Not just what he did, but why. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. But from the very beginning, his life was built on a lie. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was unmarried. In 1946, that carried tremendous stigma. To protect the family's reputation, Louise's parents raised Ted as their own. For years, Ted believed his mother was actually his older sister. This family secret would remain hidden from him until 1974, the same year his killing spree began. Here's what makes Bundy so psychologically frustrating for profilers. His childhood wasn't abusive. In his final interview before execution, Bundy said, and I'm quoting here, "I grew up in a wonderful home with 2 dedicated and loving parents. There was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. And yet, there were signs." From an early age, Bundy showed a disturbing fascination with knives. He was caught stealing multiple times. He displayed cruelty toward animals. But here's the thing. Thousands of children grow up with family secrets. Thousands of boys steal knives and harm animals. The vast majority do not become serial killers. So, what made Bundy different? In 1975, before anyone realized Ted Bundy would become one of America's most notorious serial killers, he was arrested in Utah for attempted kidnapping. The psychologist assigned to evaluate him was Dr. Al Carlisle. Carlisle spent about 20 hours with Bundy. He found him easy to talk to, charming even, but evasive. Having taken psychology courses himself, Bundy knew what Carlisle's questions meant and disliked being evaluated. Carlisle used a variety of tests, including the Rorschach inkblot test, a projective measure designed to reveal unconscious thoughts. A 2025 academic paper analyzing Bundy's Rorschach results came to a chilling conclusion. Here's what they found. Ted Bundy's Rorschach reveals an inner world comprised of complex dysphoria and unmet needs states that, when coupled with sexual sadism and psychopathy, fuel his sexual murders. In plain English, underneath the charming exterior, Bundy was filled with intense emotional pain. The violence wasn't random, it was his twisted way of managing inner turmoil. Those who saw his dark side had plenty to tell, but others, including some of his girlfriends, saw only the mask. The central mystery of Ted Bundy is this: how could someone function so normally while committing such horrific acts? Psychologist Phil McLeod explains, he was capable of mimicking normal human responses and emotions to build trust with his victims while remaining completely emotionally detached. He could understand emotions, but did not genuinely feel empathy, guilt, or remorse. This is what psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley called the mask of sanity, the ability of a psychopath to appear completely normal while lacking any genuine emotional connection. Bundy's life was filled with evidence of this mask. He worked at a suicide crisis hotline. He had a long-term relationship. He was a law student. He worked on political campaigns. But beneath the mask, something else was brewing. Dr. Al Carlisle identified 3 psychological processes that allowed Bundy to function. First, fantasy. As a child, Bundy felt left out. He used fantasies to feel powerful. Over time, these fantasies became darker, involving rape and murder. Second, dissociation. Bundy learned to avoid uncomfortable feelings. He could separate himself from the emotional weight of his actions. Third, compartmentalization. This is perhaps the most important. Bundy kept different parts of himself in strict mental compartments, the public persona in one, the killer in another. As Carlisle explained, compartmentalization is a process that all of us can engage in. It can vary from a healthy level to a very destructive process that can result in violence. Bundy presented a public face that appeared normal, while nurturing a dark side where he read true crime, consumed pornography, and crept around at night to peep in windows. Most people label Ted Bundy simply as a psychopath, but University of Kentucky professor Thomas Whittaker says that label doesn't tell the whole story. Whittaker analyzed Bundy across multiple personality dimensions: antagonism, high. He was deceptive, manipulative, callous, exploitative, and arrogant. This is the core of psychopathy. Extroversion, high. He was engaging, assertive, socially skilled. He could work a room. Conscientiousness, high. This is where Bundy diverges from the typical profile. Most psychopaths are impulsive and disorganized, but Bundy was skilled, competent, thoughtful, organized, and diligent. Neuroticism, low. He displayed glib charm and fearlessness. There was no anxiety to betray him. This combination is rare. Whittaker calls Bundy a successful psychopath, someone who combines the core traits of psychopathy with high intelligence and self-discipline. Bundy would also meet diagnostic criteria for several other conditions. Necrophilia. He decapitated at least 12 victims and retained some heads as trophies. He returned to bodies after death. Sexual sadism. Violence as sexual pleasure. And beneath all of it, the Rorschach revealed that the violence was fueled by intense inner pain. This is the paradox of Bundy, a man who felt deeply while feeling nothing at all. To understand Bundy's psychology, you have to understand the role of fantasy. In his final interview before execution, Bundy spoke candidly. In the beginning, it fuels this kind of thought process. Then, at a certain time, it is instrumental in crystallizing it, making it into something that is almost a separate entity inside. He described it as an addiction. Once you become addicted to it, you look for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, until you reach the point where you begin to think maybe actually doing it will give you that which is just beyond reading about it and looking at it. Bundy described the moment before killing as a kind of possession. It's a very difficult thing to describe. The sensation of reaching that point where I knew I couldn't control it anymore. The barriers I had learned as a child were not enough to hold me back. But here's what's crucial. Bundy also described the aftermath. And this is where we see the compartmentalization at work. It was like coming out of some horrible trance or dream, to wake up in the morning and realize what I had done with a clear mind with all my essential moral and ethical feelings intact, absolutely horrified me. Slow down, emphasize. Perhaps most chilling is what Bundy said about possession. The ultimate possession was, in fact, the taking of the life, and then the physical possession of the remains. Murder is not just a crime of lust or violence. It becomes possession. They, the victims, are part of you, and you are forever one. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit uses a framework that divides serial offenders into two categories: organized and disorganized. Bundy is the classic example of the organized offender. What does that mean? Organized offenders plan their crimes. Bundy didn't kill on impulse. He scouted locations. He selected victims who fit a specific profile. Young women with long, dark hair parted in the middle. Organized offenders bring their own weapons. Bundy carried handcuffs, stockings, a homemade mask, and a crowbar in his Volkswagen Beetle. Organized offenders control the crime scene. Bundy was meticulous. He left little evidence. He disposed of bodies in remote locations where they wouldn't be found for months. Organized offenders follow the investigation. Bundy followed news coverage of his crimes. He once even gave a ride to a young woman who was heading to the police station to report a sighting of him. Organized offenders often have a signature. For Bundy, that included returning to his victims after death, taking trophies, heads, photographs, personal items, and perhaps most critically, organized offenders are difficult to catch. Bundy evaded capture for years, in part because he didn't fit the profile of a monster. The crime scene, for an organized offender like Bundy, is a psychological fingerprint. The planning, the control, the signature, all of it reveals the mind of the person who created it. He wasn't killing in a frenzy. He was acting out a carefully constructed fantasy. One of the most disturbing aspects of Bundy's psychology was his ability to manipulate. First, the injured ruse. Bundy would put a cast on his arm or leg and approach young women asking for help carrying books to his car. It triggered compassion. It made him seem vulnerable, harmless. Second, charm as weapon. Friends, colleagues, even investigators described Bundy as likable. One reporter noted after his arrest, he was good-looking, articulate, a law student, and a budding Republican. He didn't look like a killer. Third, victim empathy mimicry. He could sound like he cared. He could make people believe he understood their pain. But it was performance. He understood emotions intellectually, without feeling them. Fourth, gaslighting. When his girlfriend Elizabeth Klopfer became suspicious and contacted police, he convinced her she was being paranoid. He even inserted himself into investigations, offering to help profile the killer. Fifth, courtroom manipulation. Bundy served as his own counsel during his murder trial in Florida. He used the courtroom as a stage, cross-examining witnesses, presenting himself as wrongfully accused. His defense team begged him to accept a plea bargain that would have meant a 75-year sentence instead of death. He refused. Public defender Michael Minerva said, "The most important thing was to save his life." But Bundy's narcissism wouldn't allow it. This is the paradox of the organized offender. He was brilliant in planning his crimes, but his own psychology, his narcissism, his need for control sabotaged him in the end.
There's a moment in Bundy's criminal career that reveals something important about his psychology. In November 1974, in Utah, Bundy approached a young woman named Carol Daronch in a shopping mall. Using his familiar ruse, pretending to be a police officer, he convinced her to get into his car. But something went wrong. Daronch became suspicious. When Bundy tried to handcuff her, she fought back, escaped from the car, and ran. For most criminals, an escape is just an escape. For Bundy, it was something more, a narcissistic injury. He couldn't tolerate failure. He couldn't tolerate rejection. And some experts believe this blow to his self-image escalated his violence. Shortly after Daronch's escape, the killings intensified. The victims multiplied. The brutality increased. This pattern, narcissistic injury, followed by escalation, is common in offenders with high levels of narcissism. Their self-image is fragile beneath the surface. When it's threatened, they lash out. Bundy couldn't let Carol Daronch go. He couldn't accept that she's seen through him. And so, he continued for years until finally, in 1978, he was arrested in Florida.
On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Outside, thousands of people gathered. They sold T-shirts. They carried signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." They cheered when the announcement came. FBI Special Agent Bill Hagmaier, who had spent years interviewing Bundy, recalled, "There were thousands of people outside. I looked at Ted and said, 'You hear that out there?' And he said, 'They're crazy. They think I'm crazy. Listen to all of them.'" Bundy spent his final hours doing what he'd always done, manipulating. He confessed to dozens of murders in a last-ditch attempt to delay execution. He granted an interview, blaming pornography for his descent into violence. But here's the truth about Ted Bundy's psychology that the experts agree on. He was not made by childhood abuse. He was not made by family trauma. He was not made by pornography alone. He was a high-functioning psychopath with narcissistic traits, sexual sadism, and a capacity for compartmentalization that allowed him to live two entirely separate lives. He killed at least 30 women, likely more. He confessed to 36. Some investigators believe the true number is higher. But as Dr. Ann Burgess, the legendary FBI profiler, always emphasized, we must approach these cases through the lens of the victim. So let's end by remembering them. Linda Ann Healy, Donna Gail Manson, Susan Elaine Rancourt, Roberta Kathleen Parks, Brenda Carol Ball, Georgian Hawkins, Melissa Ann Smith, Laura Amy, Carol Daronch, who survived, Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, Lynette Culver, Nancy Wilcox, Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, Kimberly Leach, and dozens more, whose names we may never know. Bundy once said, "Vengeance is what the death penalty really is. Really, it's a desire of society to take an eye for an eye. But the cure isn't vengeance. The cure is understanding, not to excuse, but to prevent, to see through the mask, to recognize that the monster doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes he looks like someone you'd trust,